Hey, welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. And on the show here, we talk about all things to increase muscle, lean body mass, improve body composition and performance, all without destroying your health in the process using a flexible approach. And related to that, today I've got my buddy, Dr. Tommy Wood, and we're discussing how do you make science still science, but also sexy. I think there's a trend to make science sexy, which is great, but when does it kind of go off of the rails? And this is from the perspective of educators, trainers, and coaches, people who are putting out content into the world, and people who are also consuming content. And a lot of you listening are probably doing both. And we also have divergent conversations about, talked a little bit about statistics in the beginning, so I hope that doesn't turn too many people off, but you can fast forward through that portion. But I think it is a good background and primer to at least understand what are kind of the limits of some of the studies. I talk a little bit also about longevity. We use some examples of how much muscle do you really need to accumulate over the course of your life? How many steps should you take per day, especially for general population? And the news flash there is that you don't have to hit 10,000 steps per day to see a lot of benefits. So listen to this one with Dr. Tommy Wood, and he's had other episodes here, which we'll link to below. I think he's probably the most frequent flyer of the podcast, and it's always great to have him back on here. And if you're looking for ways to increase your robustness and your resilience along with potential longevity benefits, check out the Physiologic Flexibility Certification, the PhysFlex Cert. This is the level 2. So the Flex Diet Cert would be level 1. How do you get really good at nutrition and recovery? More of the basics, such as sleep, macronutrients, NEAT, so non-exercise activity, thermogenesis, walking, etc. And in the level 2, the PhysFlex Cert, we talk about the 4 leverage points of your body and how to incorporate newer things such as cold water immersion, sauna, breath techniques, regulation of glucose, ketones, and much more. So to get on the wait list or to see if it is open, go to physiologicflexibility.com. I have all the information there. There's also a way I think you can contact me there if you have any specific questions. So go to physiologicflexibility.com and enjoy this wide-ranging conversation. My good buddy, Dr. Tommy Wood. Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to the podcast here. Dr. Mike T. Nelson. And I'm back today with my good buddy, Dr. Tommy Wood, who's been on here before with our buddy, Dr. Ben House. I think Tommy was on even months before that. I remember we recorded something in Costa Rica with the bugs chirping in the background and stuff too. So this might be the awesome. Third time you're on here. So
fewer snakes and stuff around this time.
That is true. Yeah, you got to watch out for those. Long story. If people don't know, Tommy got bit by a snake in Costa Rica and had his quarantine down there was way worse than mine. I'll say that. How's it going, man?
Yeah, good. Excited to be back. Excited to talk with you again, as always. I think things are going really well. It's actually been the beginning of the year has been super busy, but in a good way. Like things are sort of waking up and catching up from a couple of years of being dormant. So that's probably all good stuff.
Definitely. And then also Tommy knows that if he doesn't show up on the podcast, I'll change his training into some hellacious like 2K repeats or some shit.
It's gonna be 2Ks every week. Yeah. So yes, coach, I'm here. Whatever you need, whatever you want.
Training's going well. Looks like it's going good.
Yeah. Some new stuff to play around with on a competition coming up. It's a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. Again, they're gonna have a crazy travel schedule going into the competition, so I'll just be kind of do whatever I can and show up. But it's been a lot of fun so far.
Yeah, and for people listening, what is the competition and the date?
Oh, it's Viking Fest, which is the local strongman competition. Happens every year. Did it last year, which was my first competition last year. And it's May 22nd. And we have some things like an arm over arm seated carpool. There's a moving medley with a Zercher carry, sandbag carry, farmer's walk. There's a log press ladder. So it's first time playing around with a log. And then there's some weird deadlift for max reps using some strange earthquake bar or something. And then there's a mystery event that we just figure out what it is on the day. As
that sounds like fun.
great. Yeah, as usual, like local strongman competition. This is something that you taught me very early on. Is like, just show up ready to do whatever, because it's gonna change and it's gonna be weird, and it's like, just whatever happens, be ready for it. So
yeah, there's so many unknowns, especially at the local level too. And I get it. Like, you're dealing with, equipment, and like the one I did years ago, it was great because one of the local people made all the equipment for it. So they made we had to do like a small frame carry. I think it was only like 450 or 500 pounds or something. So it wasn't like super heavy. I mean, as far as frame carries go, that's just the local event. The part I goofed up though was that they gloss painted the handles on it, and it was brand new and nobody had used them before. And so, like most strongman events, if anyone's done one, it's like, okay, frame carries up next. And, I was just in the novice division. So they're like, all right, warm up. And then we're all looking around each other, and the frame's already loaded to like 450 because it doesn't go any lighter. And I'm like, fuck, I guess I should see if I can deadlift it. So I picked it up. I'm like, okay. Like 30 seconds later, the guy's like, all right, you guys ready? And you could not even get chalk to stick to the handle. It was, the grip on it was just hellacious. So there's always unknowns of who knows what. So but that kind of makes it fun too. So
yeah, exactly. I'm definitely less suited to sort of the real rigor of something like a powerlifting competition. So like this kind of the randomness and sort of the changing nature of these strongman events are much more like in my wheelhouse, or something that I enjoy. So it's all part of the experience.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, the variety is much better.
Yeah.
But if people aren't expecting it, like if people transition, I've had a couple people transition from powerlifting to strongman, and I keep telling them, like, it's not going to be run the same way. Like, if you're used to your meets like being run like clockwork, like especially at a local level, it's just not. And there's going to be stuff there you didn't plan for. It's going to be weird equipment. That just be okay with it, because everybody's using the same thing, so you're fine.
yeah. One of the, at least from the last competition I did, one of the benefits of that was that they had sandbags that we had to carry. I think they were 200 pounds. They were definitely not 200 pounds. They were like 150 maybe. And so that's the good stuff. That's the good part about things not being so tightly regulated.
Yeah, I heard a story of, I won't name the guy, but moderately high level competitors years ago doing a car deadlift, and he's pretty sure they forgot to remove the weights from the heavyweight to the lighter weight division in the car, because people went from hitting like 15 to 20 reps to like some people zeroed the event. So yeah, you never know.
Oh yeah, I again, the first competition I did, we had there was a simulated Dinny Stone event in that one, and people, like, we did a podcast about it, so people have heard about it if they heard the last one. But one of the guys in my category, and again, this is novice lightweight, he was just super short. So like when he lifted the stones off the ground, they didn't really lift off. So like one edge of both weights was on the ground. It was a max hold, so he was just like holding it there, and the judge couldn't see that it was still touching the ground. And so like I think he won the event despite not actually lifting the stones off the ground. And like, you can't complain about it. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah. And he probably doesn't want to be the guy that they have to bring out the little pedestals for him to stand on.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, today's topic, I thought we would talk about how do we make the discussion of science sexy, but still have it be science. Because I think you can make a lot of things sexy, but how do you do that without sort of violating kind of the principles of science itself, right? And if you go around social media, I like that there's a lot more science educators, and I think that's definitely a move in the right direction, which I think we both 100% applaud. But for people who are listening who don't have a background in science, like, what are some things, maybe little warnings, or kind of what follow-up should they do on their own? Because I think there's a tendency, especially if you're not trained in what to look for, to be like, oh, so and so is a scientist person. Well, they must be 100% correct. And I mean, we've both been at conferences long enough. I remember being at the ACSM conference in 2005, and I won't say their names or even the topic, but basically two of the top researchers in said area were arguing about one paper that they both had read. And this went on for like 20 minutes. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, one, this is amazing. Two, this is kind of scary. Three, I'm like, these are both like the top two people in their field. They're both looking at the same data from the same paper that I know they read, and yet they still don't agree. And to me, that was kind of like this light bulb moment of like, oh, like everybody is unintentionally kind of biased by their own background and their own studies and what they've kind of done. And you may have two people looking at the same data and not agree. And then related to that, when I worked for a medical device company, we had there's a potential recall that was going on, which has been made public years ago. So I'm not revealing anything I'm not supposed to. And we had an in-house statistics guy, who was a PhD in stats from, I don't know, some crazy school. And we weren't sure. So we hired another consultant who was a PhD in statistics in medical device area in biology. And I had to sit there in a meeting for an hour every day for literally 4 weeks in a row and watch these two dudes argue back and forth for the whole hour about stuff that I didn't even understand at all. And all I left with that was going, shit. So now we've got two people who are in the same field who have their terminal degree in the area, and they can't even agree on what method is the best method to do. So it's not as always black and white, I think, as what people think that it would be.
Yeah, I've done some more advanced statistics training recently myself, because it's something I do a lot of and that I'm interested in. And when you get to sort of the upper level of statistics and you get people who know what they're talking about, they'll tell you that actually it's a lot of it is very subjective. And
which blew me away, because I was told statistics is a thing that answers all of our subjective questions.
And no, it's not, because the way that you choose to frame the question, and the methods you apply, it really boils down to how you interpret the scientific question, and that then comes back to how you subjectively think about what it is you want to learn. Plus, there's some fudge factor in terms of, often people will move things around a little bit once they start to see the data, which you technically shouldn't do in general if you're trying to like truly answer a question, rather than doing something exploratory. But yeah, there's a huge subjective factor in the way that you approach the analysis of the data. And most people, right, if you're reading the methods section of a paper, I guarantee that even people who understand like the actual methods, the things they did with the subjects or whatever, you're going to gloss over the statistical analysis section, because you're just like, oh yeah, stats, whatever. But the way that people choose to do that will give you two very different answers. You've obviously seen that in real life.
Yeah, and I'm not a stats wizard by any stretch of the imagination. I have a minor in mathematics, which isn't necessarily stats, and suffered through biostatistics 1 through 3. And I did my minimum to know enough to hopefully not be super dangerous. But even when I look on peer reviews now and I look at the question, and the question to me can be solved with what I would say is basic statistics, and they're doing something really crazy that I don't understand. I'm like, external stats review. Because my first question is like, why did you pick this super complicated method, and what are you trying to show that I don't understand? Like, when you could use this other method that is very straightforward, has been done for bazillions of years. That just makes me nervous. And then I look to see who funded the study. And if it's funding of the thing where they have a potential positive impact, especially supplement companies funding research, not to pin it on all them, but that just makes me more suspicious. And I want someone who actually understands what they did to make sure that what they did is legit, because I don't feel qualified at that point to say yay or nay.
Yeah. I mean, in general, it doesn't work with all questions, particularly things that require detail, like very sort of high dimensionality data. That, it does get tricky in terms of how to get that across and analyze it, like omics stuff, proteomics.
Oh, sure. Where you're taking like just shit tons of data too,
and just like throwing it in the pot. And so it's difficult to get it across. But in general, I feel very strongly that most people, you should be able to answer the question by just showing people the data, right?
Yes.
You can make a graph where you look at the graph, you're like, oh yeah, that's different. And so even if like the statistical analysis shows that, it's like the p-value is not quite below 0.05 and it's not technically statistically significant for whatever reason, power, or because they adjusted for a whole bunch of stuff. Like, you can look at the graph and be like, oh yeah, there's a signal right there. I can see it. And like most people can intuitively do that. So if a paper doesn't show you the data, sort of hides it all in tables and random complex statistical analyses, like I usually tend to think that's a red flag, because even people who don't understand statistics, like they can understand a graph. I'm like, oh yeah, I see it right there.
Yeah, and especially when I go to look at the raw data and it's not there, I'm like, oh, okay, what's going on? Yeah, I think
I'm a really annoying reviewer for papers, because like my first question is always put all the data on the graph, like bar chart with like mean and standard error of the mean. Get out of here. Just like, you have 12 subjects, show me all the data. Like, it's not that complex. And it's like literally always the first thing I write, because that's the first step to sort of having people really appreciate what data looks like. And it's not tidy, but when you see all of it, you can really actually understand what's going on.
Yeah, and especially a lot of times looking at, what are some of the outliers or data they sort of threw out is that's where like all the really interesting questions potentially come from, right? Because your first question then is that quote unquote a real thing or not? If we can show that it is a real thing, then, what the hell's going on? I remember Stu Phillips at ACSM years ago presenting this data, looking at some hypertrophy response in a chronic study they did. And he shows the graph, and there's all the data points are down here. And there's 2 data points, like 2 statistical significant deviations way up at the top. And I asked him, I said, hey, like what the hell's going on with that? And he's like, oh, those are the Beef Brothers. There's these 2 guys who, like, I don't know how many pounds of beef they ate per day, were in the study. And I think it was a hypertrophy study. And they just got these massive gains compared to everybody else.
Amazing.
And so then later they did some studies looking at, was it testosterone? Was there different changes? And that sort of led to this kind of extreme responders and this kind of other literature of looking at response rates. But if you didn't show a data plot with all the data, and you just said, we had 2 people who were outliers, we threw them out, or we put them in the data, you wouldn't see that. Right. And so I think even
if you didn't show the data points, you'd have a bigger like standard deviation. You have a bigger error bar, but you have no appreciation for like where they are in terms of magnitude.
That could be everyone is screwball, or it could be 1 or 2 people left in, but you don't know, right? Because you could, if you wanted to manufacture an artificial data set, you could get them to look different, but have the standard deviation be the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then one of my studies was actually tossed out from my PhD research because the standard deviation was too high. We were doing some flow mediated dilation on people, and I showed it to my advisor, and he's like, well, you just suck as a sonographer. Your technique is bad. And I'm like, dude, I did all the practices. I did everything. So I got pissed off. So I went back and looked at the data, because we had baseline before and then after intervention. And it turns out that the people I enrolled in the study were at the extreme ends of what is considered a normal response. So they didn't really vary much over the interventions, but their baselines were way at the extremes. So I argued that it wasn't necessarily my skill, but the fact that we just happened to get these people who are at both ends of the spectrum, because a healthy
Yeah.
population looking at vessel function. And he's like, well, don't worry, you can't publish it now because your standard deviation is too poor. So I was like, shit. So I had to can that whole study.
No, but it's stuff like that, like expecting things to be homogeneous and people to be homogeneous. Like, it just doesn't. It's stuff like that. It drives me crazy. Like in my fields, right, we have animal models of brain injury, and they are super variable, like incredibly variable for various, like, and it's usually anatomical variability from animal to animal. And I think that's really good because humans are also super variable.
Yeah.
But the problem is that it means that you can't just do an experiment that has like 8 animals, right?
Yeah.
You need more animals to account for the variability. But there's like strength and important things in that variability. But everybody else tries to sweep that stuff under the rug. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't do a good job of actually translating from animals to humans in general. Like, we really suck at it.
Yeah. And even just variability itself is something that no one in the statistical world wants to talk about, because if your data is not, for people listening, normally distributed, right, it doesn't look like this nice kind of little bell-shaped curve of where most of the people are in the middle. You have to account for that, and you have to use different methods to then look at that data. You can't
and
just
they're not as nice or easy to interpret. That's why it gets
no, and then it gets messy. And then, obviously I'm biased because my whole PhD was on fine scale variability across physiologic systems. So we were purposely looking at what is the variability difference in different systems. But trying to get that through a review sometimes is almost impossible, because people are like, well, you don't have units on this thing. I'm like, it's a variability measurement. We're looking to see how different one measurement is from the next. And the time course, the temporal relationship matters. And they're like, well, where's your statistics? I'm like, it's not linear distributed. So we can't take your standard off the shelf statistics and show that. They're like, no, this is crap. So I have one study that literally went through 13 revisions. And eventually I just pulled the plug on it and said, fuck it, I'm not publishing it. Yeah, I feel like we're just bitching about stats now the whole time.
I know. Yeah, I was like, okay, how do we get back on topic? So
you got one listener left.
making boring things sexy.
I think we just did the opposite.
Yeah,
it's like a good topic and just beat the shit out of it.
Make it really boring. No, science is great. I have thought about this a lot recently, and like the best, it's really funny because I think the best content, people producing the best content on social media, and that's where a lot of us get our science nowadays. Even me, like, people will post a new interesting study, and I go and get to dig into it. But I think the best content creators is just say the same things again and again and again, but maybe they change the approach. Maybe they change the message slightly, maybe they change the application slightly, because different people will internalize it in a different way. And we also know that you probably need to hear things like 10 times before it actually starts to sink in. It's similar to, there'll be things that I tell my wife and I tell her it 5 times, and then somebody else tells it to her once, and she's like, look at this thing that I just, that I just heard about. Like, isn't this great? And it's like, sometimes changing the person, changing the message slightly, that's what gets things across. But that's not necessarily what people are drawn to. What people are drawn to is novelty. And so the alternative is people who are like, I have a new thing that's really important every week. And, here's this brand new information that only I know. And, so that's one part of it. And as soon as people are presenting information like that, immediately you have to be wary, because most people are like really good at one thing or a couple of things. As soon as they profess to be experts in lots of things, then you need to be concerned, because they probably just read one paper and are now telling you about it as if they're an expert. And oftentimes, we've talked about this. Sometimes they'll be like, hey, here's this brand new paper in this fancy journal. Here's this thing that you should do because of it. But actually, there's like 20 years of applied research that this person hasn't read that completely disagrees with this one fancy paper. Yet the fancy paper is the thing that gets sold to you. And I also see people who, they have an area of expertise and they've developed a following because of it. But then there's this thing where either they feel the need to create novelty in order to keep people engaged, or people are asking them questions like, hey, because you talk about all this stuff, what's your opinion on this? And then they feel like they have to have an opinion, and then they write a blog post and have a podcast. And this is one of the main reasons why I increasingly don't like being on social media, is because like people are asking me for opinions on things that I don't have an opinion about, but I'm expected to have one. Like, I don't know, but people probably don't want to hear me say I don't know a lot. Right. But then, those who aspire to some degree of fame or notoriety or whatever it is, and I think that drives a lot of it, to be honest, they find themselves having to have an opinion, and then you give yourself a crash course and tell people like things as if you're an expert on that area, when actually in reality you've probably missed a whole bunch of stuff and you don't really understand it that well.
Yeah, and that's what's so hard too, because if, let's say, you're starting out and you're swerving a little out of your lane, the amount of time it takes to be somewhat updated on the literature in the background is massive. So like even with peer reviews and stuff, like I just got one the other day, like soccer and jump training. I'm like, heck if I know. Like, nope, sorry, I'm not the reviewer for that, especially at that level of a detail. I can tell you basic stuff, but and then the amount of time to go backwards and look at all the information. And if you have something that's a bright, shiny new object like every week or every day, there's just not enough time to go back and look at that. And not to pick on younger people, but if you're 19 years old, I know you haven't done all that. You just haven't been on Earth long enough to even have time to get through that kind of stuff. So that, I think, is different now than it used to be. I would say, maybe I get your thoughts on this too, that like 15 years ago, it was experts could never like kind of go out of their lane, right? I remember when John Berardi was publishing some stuff at T Nation on nutrition, and he sent an article into TC on exercise, and TC is like, what are you doing talking about exercise? No one's going to believe anything you say. And he's like, well, my PhD, I took a lot of stuff that was in exercise metabolism. I just happened to focus more on nutrition. And he got just kind of crucified for talking about exercise. And he wasn't saying anything crazy. It was just like really basic stuff like you would learn in an undergrad class. Where now it seems like the pendulum has shifted almost the other way, where it's like almost all novelty. It's like, oh, you're an expert in, TBIs. Well, I just twisted my ankle, bro. What do I do?
I don't really know. I don't really know what's driven that shit. I mean, I think our access to information nowadays has maybe given us the illusion of knowledge, both in others as well as ourselves. And that may be part of it. But then there's also, if you're a professor at a fancy institution and you've gotten tens of millions of dollars to do research, and it's usually basic science research, and all these people all day tell you how smart you are, and then somebody comes along and you get offered book deals or podcasts or something. I just think there's this element of people being told, like, you've had smoke blown up your ass all day every day by people, and all of a sudden you start to believe your own BS because like there's nobody around you who you trust to be like, dude, you just don't understand that, you just don't know that, and you need to. And so like there's this drive for people to be this expert, and I think some of these things are now sort of being funneled down, and it will change over time, right? In 5 years time it'll be somebody different, But right now you have like 2 or 3, famous scientists who are sort of like really driving certain narratives, even when some of the things that they're going into are really outside of their area of expertise. Yet we sort of take it as gospel because of their notoriety.
Yeah, and that's also hard too, because as someone who is doing, say, science education, one of your goals is to have a bigger platform, because that allows you to make, more change and to affect more people. But then it's like you said, the tricky line of how far do you stray outside of where you're at. And with social media, the sort of the feedback and the applause and everything is instant, right? Yeah. So you start posting on something that's a little bit outside your area of expertise. Oh my God, everyone loved that thing, right? So it's sort of a intrinsic human nature, if left unchecked, to try to do more of that.
Yeah.
Right. And in one hand, yep, you are doing more education, but if that goes unchecked, then at some point you were kind of swerving around the road and now you're in the ditch and now the car just went entirely off the cliff.
The thing that probably concerns me the most, right? So there are always going to be people who are interested in that kind of stuff, and they just like voracious consumers of knowledge, regardless of the application. I think that's great. You want to learn stuff. You want to hear about the latest papers. Even if you don't have formal training in the scientific process, I think that's great. I applaud people who want to learn new things. That's fabulous stuff. What concerns me is when it detracts from what supposedly is the overall goal. And so, like, if I'm a scientist and trying to be a science educator, it's mainly in the area of health, right? So I want to help other people improve their health, or I want health in general to be improved with, improving knowledge and or supporting the changes required to do that. And then also highlighting areas where actually for some people that's really, really difficult, and how can we support them when they don't have the financial or other resources to do this stuff that would be easy for you or I to do if we wanted to. That's a big part of health, the sort of the social determinants of health. And so that's my goal. And so if I were to continuously add novelty, new things that you need to do, these new 12 things that you need to do in this exact order so that you can get an extra 8 minutes of deep sleep tonight, I think that really detracts from the overall goal of improving people's health, because the things that matter will always be the same. And it's like, you call it violent consistency, right? Yeah. The same boring stuff every day. That's what really matters. And so as soon as you add novelty, lists of things you need to do, these 47 steps to do X, I think that really detracts from the thing that matters, which is violent consistency of those basic things.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And at least for myself, I always feel like I'm kind of walking on the fine line of, can I find new and novel ways to get people back to the basics? And if it is something that has, data, or even if it doesn't, what is the context of it? And then also, like, what is a realistic expectation, right? So, I did some videos about, beta alanine, and yeah, lots of data on it, shows it's beneficial. But again, you're looking at, I think it was a study done in elite rowers who were, well, depends on what you consider elite, but they were doing a 2K below 7 minutes. So they weren't like your average recreational people you pull in off the street. And I think it decreased their time by, if I remember right, 3 or 4 seconds, right? Which for that population, with just a supplement without additional training, that's pretty damn impressive.
Yeah.
But to the average person, like, to shave 3 seconds off of their 9-minute 2K, do you really need beta alanine? It's like, no, bro, just get on the rower.
Yeah.
So I always go back and forth of trying to explain that, yeah, this thing works. Here's the data. Here's what it is. But trying to then put that back into context of, here's what it was actually beneficial for. And you're still down in like the way single digits. And if you're an elite athlete, yeah, that matters, right? To do that without additional training, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
If you don't even know what a rower is, who cares? Like, beta alanine is like dead last on your list of shit to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example. And there's another, there's some nice stuff. I think, and people are, like, some people I see have done a better job of this. Is like, let's look at relative effect sizes, right?
Yes.
Because, like, here are the things that matter for the things that you care about. And so, like, longevity is a hot topic. I can use that as an example because there's a nice paper that at least has a bit of this, and there's also some similar stuff for cognitive decline, which is another thing that a lot of people ask me about. But, like, if and this is also related to just like general activity. And if you look at this, there was a nice meta-analysis, meta-regression on walkings, like steps per day and all-cause mortality. Like, if you increase your steps from 2,500 to 5,000 or 7,000 a day, like, the effect is the same as not smoking, not having high blood pressure, not having kidney disease, like all these things that we know are really bad for your health, right? And the improvement that you get just by adding a few thousand steps a day on your mortality risk is massive, right? That's a huge effect. Whatever fancy supplement somebody is telling you to take, or whatever you're supposed to do to increase your deep sleep by 3%, like, it's just like a drop in the ocean compared to how really impactful these things that we know are beneficial and helpful are. And so that's the thing. If you're focusing on the supplement because you don't want to go out and do another 4,000 steps a day, right? You're really playing at the wrong end of the effect size spectrum.
Yeah, and I think it's human nature to think linearly. And I mean, I'm biased because I did a master's in engineering where they try to beat thinking linearly out of you. And I know that I still have a bad habit of doing it. Just not sucking at some basic things and going from really bad to just not so bad has a massive amount of leverage, right? Because I think people assume that, oh man, if I'm not doing my 10,000 steps a day, it's just all crap. Like, this is kind of either all or nothing, or, oh, like on the other extreme in the fitness world, it's like, man, I was doing 10,000 steps a day. Bro, I got to double that. I got to do 20,000 steps a day. I'm going to be shredded in like 7 days. It's like you're assuming that the goal from 0 to 10,000 and 10,000 to 20,000 is the same response, which it clearly isn't.
Yeah.
But then on the low end, it's beneficial, like you were saying, for people who maybe don't move a lot. It's like, no, you don't even have to hit 10,000. Yeah. Like, if you're getting 2,000 steps a day, just getting to 4,000 or 3,000 is a massive improvement, right? And that maybe 5,000 to 7,000 for you is a more realistic number for, this year, right? And there's a huge benefit, like you said, to that, which I think that makes it more, for the average person listening, more doable then too, and hopefully tries to buffer some of the extremism we see in fitness also.
Yeah, and I think we see similar stuff with muscle mass, and I mean, it's difficult for me to talk about it to a certain extent, because whenever I talk about the importance of muscle mass on longevity or health or disease risk, people are like, bro, like, whatever, I don't want to have to look like you. And like, no, I've literally had this like at conferences, like, when I talk about muscle mass and longevity or disease risk. And so, like, again, if you look at all the population data, I've done some of these analyses myself, you basically just don't want to be in the bottom 25% of the population, right?
Yeah.
So
it's a pretty low bar if you're going general population.
It's a super low bar. It's like, are you doing something remotely resistance type with your body to something maybe within a few reps of voluntary muscular failure twice a week for maybe a total of 30 to 45 minutes? Like, that's it. That's all you require to have enough muscle mass to see the benefits. And again, that bar is super, super low, as it should be. But because a lot of people don't do even that, we assume, and we've kind of, because as a society, we idolize athletes, right?
Yes.
It's a big part of who we are as a society. And so you assume that in order to be healthy through exercise, that's the ideal. When actually they're doing stuff that's probably detrimental. Like, on the other side, they've gone too far, and now sort of like the benefits are being erased because of the amount that they're doing. And that's fine, because it pays their bills and they should do it. But nobody needs to be running marathons to be aerobically fit, right? Just go and walk for 30 minutes. That's it. Like, that's where you start to see the biggest bang for your buck. And I think trying to get that message across is really tricky, because again, if you want to embody the. So if you're going to make exercise a habit, you have to embody this idea that you internally are somebody that exercises. I am somebody who does physical activity, who does movement. And we think that the people who do that are the people who go and run marathons and are ridiculous bodybuilders with an FFMI of 30 plus.
Which is so crazy.
Yeah, and that's just not like the human movement is walking every day and being able to just like lift some stuff that you need to be able to do just for your day-to-day activities, right? That's it. And we just need to find a way to sort of get that into people's psyches, because I don't think people have internalized that.
You think part of that is probably made worse by videos we put out too, or at least myself, of showing performance, because it's just kind of the thing we do, not necessarily as everyone else needs to do that. Like we've talked with Ben a fair amount about this too, of like on the high end of the spectrum, if you take like a deadlift, like should you always be able to pull 225, 300, 400, 500, 600? Right? At some point that curve goes whoop, and then it's going to start going the opposite direction at some point too, especially with, you know, risk reward and spinal health and everything else. And I don't know if we have much data on where that point is, but I would expect that it's probably lower than what most fitness people would think that it is.
Absolutely. And part of that is you have to like, you know,
which kind of pains me to say.
Yeah, you're like I am the embodiment of health. I am the person you should listen to if you're like a fitfluencer, if that's even a word.
Yeah.
Right. So then you convince yourself that what you do is the thing that everybody else should be doing, when in reality that it's like as far from it. Like the gap is vast. And I don't know the right way to approach this. Like some people are motivated by seeing people who are just much better than them, be that from a body composition standpoint, from a strength standpoint, from a aerobic fitness standpoint. Like some people enjoy seeing that, but for a lot of people, like that comparison just isn't helpful. And so for like I myself, like I'll post videos or like pictures of stuff that I'm doing in the gym, but I'll never, you should never say never, but I won't post pictures of myself like without clothes on, and I won't. If I show you a bar with some weight on it, I won't tell you how many reps I did, because I don't think that's useful for you to know, right? You may find it interesting, the kind of training that I'm doing, and that's great. But the number of reps that I can do, and to be honest, I'm not that, like, in the grand scheme of things, I'm not that strong. I'm well above what I need to be for health, and I appreciate that. But like compared to people that I see and I watch on Instagram, I'm pretty weak. And so like I don't think you need to know what I'm lifting. You can see how like the things that I'm lifting, like in terms of the events and stuff, I think that's interesting. But like the exact weight or reps or whatever, I don't think that's that useful for other people to know. And there's a possibility that it could be detrimental. But like not everybody thinks like that. So I don't know the best way to approach it.
Yeah. And I realized lately I haven't posted hardly any videos just because I don't want to be next to my phone when I'm lifting most of the time. I realize I've just avoided altogether, and the thought of just setting something up. And it also kind of goes back to, it's like, I don't really think that many people care. You know, it's like if the stuff that I do is more for my own internal record than anything else. It's not, I don't think anything I do is impressive really compared to other people. But again, that's all goes back to being relative, right? I think some people are motivated to see someone make progress, and other people are like, well, that's so, you know, batshit. You know, watching Andy Bolton pull 1,000 pounds to me is like, on one hand, I'm like, that is so impressive to be, you know, the first or second human that's done that. And then it's also so far removed from anything I'll ever do in my lifetime that it might as well be like going to Mars, you know?
Yeah, that was actually there. So I remember that, and I remember that Andy Bolton lift. But I remember more clearly Eddie Hall's first 500 kilo deadlift.
Yes. Yeah, I saw that too.
Where, I mean,
he almost died.
Where he literally almost died. Like
you know, literally.
his vascular system is emptying down his face, out of his nose. There's like blood everywhere out of his nose. The number of drugs that he had to take to get that big. And so like he pulled that deadlift that year. He won World's Strongest Man. And he was like, I'm out.
Yeah.
because like he knew he was endangering his health to achieve that. So like I love seeing humans do ridiculous things, like seeing the limits of human performance. I think is great.
Oh,
I love it, but I think it does require some, the person to understand, and which he did, and I think that's great. It's like, this is not good for your health. Like, you want to stick around and be around for your kids and his wife, and that's the stuff that you talked about. It's like, I just can't keep doing it because I will kill myself doing it.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good divergent there. If people listen to this podcast and expect no divergence, they're sorely disappointed already. So it's okay. Any other ways or things that I would say, one, from an educator standpoint, this is my own selfish question of when you're putting out content as an educator or a trainer or a coach that they should be aware of, and then two, as more of a consumer. I know we covered some of the topics to that end already.
Yeah, I think there's two things that I guess come up a lot, and they're probably important both as an educator and as a consumer. And they are like consistency. So like consistency in message, and again, finding new ways to say the same thing so that you can reach a new group of people who will like internalize the message slightly differently. And uncertainty and nuance, like that's just so critical. And so actually I was talking to a friend of mine. He's a chief medical officer of a large digital health company, and he doesn't put himself out there in the world sort of in this way because he has a huge amount of doubt in his own abilities. He has some imposter syndrome, and I think that that's so important. Like, those are the people that we need to hear more from, because right, if you understand the nuance, if you understand that like not everything is black and white, we need those people to be out in the world and talking about health, because it is like different for different people, and there is nuance, and different people understand things in different ways, and people work with different populations. Like, all this stuff is important. Whereas the alternative is like sort of either continuous novelty or rigid application of very complex procedures. Like humans just don't work like that. I'm sorry. Like, you spend enough time.
Bro, you're pissing on my 47-step AM routine now.
Like, and it's all very well and good saying, this is in mice, but ... Yeah. Like, dude, if you spend most of your time working only with mice, and this is coming from like I spend,
and you do animal research,
and I do animal research. That's what pays my bills. Like, you just, if you've only done that and you've never actually worked with a human struggling to improve their health or body weight, and this is actually there's another we haven't touched on this arena yet, but there's this big like sort of like spat in the world of weight loss. Like, is it the carbs and the insulin, or is it the calories? Right. And this is this continuous, I
can't believe it's still going on.
Like, come on, it's like, it's ridiculous. But there's this continuous cycle of, like, in the academic literature, like they'll write a review paper and then they'll slam the other one. There's like this continuous bickering, like literally helps nobody who is struggling to improve, who wants to improve their body composition. And not everybody wants to, and that's fine, but people who want to, like these academics who understand this stuff theoretically, or some of them don't understand it theoretically, but I think they do. Like, this arguing, it literally helps nobody, and they have obviously never actually gone to a person struggling to improve their health or struggling to improve their body composition and really understood what that process looks like. And this is what's happening, right? I've worked with all these mice. Here's this thing that works in my mice. Here's how you should do it in humans. Like, that person has never worked with an individual trying to improve.
And they never say, like, make sure to do this with your own mice. It's always like you as a human.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, like, do we cover some of the, yeah, so hopefully some of that kind of helps people navigate some of those things.
Yeah. And I get some pushback on, even like, I have obviously 2 certifications and I want people to take them, and people are like, but I don't want to spend like 20 to 24 hours going through it. I'm like, great, don't. Like, I don't know what to tell you. It's like, I even think that I tried as hard as I could to distill it down, right? So to distill protein down into a 1 hour lecture that's useful and accurate. Shit, that took me freaking forever. And even at the end, I'm like, oh, but I left out this and left out that, but like, I can't make it an 8 hour course and have the thing be 400 hours. You might as well go to college then.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But at some point I can't make the whole certification 2 hours to cover all these things. It's just not possible. And part of it is maybe I get older and crankier that if I get all these crazy business stuff from people. So this guy sent me a video the other day. He's like, on your Instagram, what you really need to do is you need to do like talking head, like 30-second clips, and make sure you give them something that's very deliverable. And I'm like, what if I just don't want to do that? I'm like, because what am I going to say in 30 seconds? That's going to be, there are some basic things, but other than that, it's like I'm at the point now where I'm like, if you only want like the 10-second blurb, like you're not going to like any of my stuff. So why am I going to put out a whole bunch of stuff that's all super short condensed and then try to sell you a 24-hour course?
Yeah.
Right. It just doesn't make sense. I know you guys have a blood course that's many hours long. That's really good.
I mean, and it's like the vast majority of people will not be able to sit through it. Neither should they have to. But that's
right.
kind of right.
But that's kind of the point.
That's kind of the point. Like most people don't need it. But if you want it, you should do it. But be prepared to sit through. I think it's like 45 hours at this point. I
didn't realize it was that long. I got to get back in there.
Yeah, it kept on because like we did.
Because you had a bunch of case studies, I know, right?
There's a bunch of case studies, but like we did, I think one of the first videos or sections is on blood sugar, and I think the first one we did and metabolic health, and I think the first video we did is like an hour and a half, and then we turned around and we're like, we barely scratched the surface of this topic. So then we did like 3 follow-up videos and it like probably all the metabolic health and glucose content probably totals like 8 to 10 hours at this point. Like, so, and that's just, it is what it is. So if you like that kind of stuff, you should listen to it, but the vast majority of people shouldn't.
But I think that's a benefit because you know who the target audience is. So for me, the people who contact me and are like, I just don't understand. Like, I need help with this. It's like, okay, great. Then you need to hire a coach or someone who can translate the data for you and has worked with actual humans, not just training mice, and just pay them for their opinion. Yes, I know it's an expert opinion and all that kind of stuff, but the reality is we do that all the time. Like, I just filed my taxes. So I pay the CPA a lot of money to be like, hey, I don't sit down and ask her to read the tax code to me. I trust that she's going to do her job. And so far it's been well. Yeah. So I'm trying to, same thing with you guys. You're targeting coaches and people who want to learn to do better, and then not necessarily the ultimate end user per se. And if you try to do both, I think a lot of times it just ends up being this disaster of short quips with no context and no background, and people feel like they have a little bit of knowledge and they're just running around more dangerous than they were before.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Any other last comments? We'll wrap up.
No, I don't think so. As usual, we sort of zoomed around a bit, but I think there's for the 3 people still listening, hopefully they got some useful stuff out of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I my guess takeaways would be, if you see someone that kind of swerves out of their lane a little bit, like, maybe pay a little bit more attention, right? And a lot of times you may not know what their background is. Some people have a bigger background in it you're just not aware of.
Yeah.
And then if it's always a new shiny thing all the time, that to me is always kind of a red flag too. That yes, there's new discoveries, yes, there's new things, but the standard principles have worked for, thousands upon thousands of years. And if you're not doing those big rocks already, like the new sexy stuff is not really going to move the needle all that much, which I know isn't very exciting either, but that's the way it goes. And the last part too is that, science just moves slow. Like, that's just the reality of the process. And some studies are quote unquote correct. Some will be disproven. Some will shown to be completely wrong. Like, I remember, like, one of my favorite Tim Noakes quotes was, He's like, all right, all the stuff I'm going to teach you today, 50% of this later will probably be shown to be wrong. The hard part is I don't know what 50%. And that's kind of the process. So
Yeah. So I maybe in there is another little nugget which is potentially useful when people publicly and openly tell you about the times and they were wrong, or as part of this process they're like, oh yeah, like 2 years ago I thought this and I'm wrong now. And Noakes is a nice example of that, because I think that he's very ardently low carb now,
yeah,
but he has this there's this famous time when he wrote like one of the Bibles on endurance performance and endurance training, and at a conference he like took the fuel section of the book, like, and it's all like just 100% carbs, all carbs all day all the time, and he ripped out of his book and he was like this is wrong, right? And so whether or not you agree with him on that, at least he's willing to stand up and say, do you know what, I was not right about this, and be very public about it. And so that's another sort of like factor that you should look for in people who you can trust, because they're willing to acknowledge when they're wrong.
Yeah. I mean, the example I think of that is like Rob Wolf, who I love, like, but his really early stuff, I didn't like any of it. I was like, who the hell is this guy? What is he talking about? But over time, I saw him change his opinion slightly based on new data, and he read the data and he helped people and he cared about it. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, because that is more rare than what people realize. And so then I was like, oh, wow, that is cool. So I always look to see over time, faced with new data, will people change their mind or at least consider it and not just dismiss it because it doesn't agree with their opinion? Will they at least spend some time thinking about it? So
yeah, super important. Yeah.
And where can people find more about your courses, or if you want to be found when you're not in the lab working with animals?
Instagram is usually where people should go. So I'm at Dr. Tommy Wood on Instagram. Yeah, you'll see occasional photos of things happening in the gym, maybe a paper that I wrote that's come out, pictures of dogs. If you like those things, sometimes as a sarcastic meme, I'll get like I'll get inspired to.
The coffee brain one was good. Jody showed me that one. I like that.
So, and it's super intermittent, but if you enjoy things like that, then Instagram is the place to find me. I do try, and I don't get many DMs, which is why I can say this, and I'm happy with that. But I do try and answer the DMs that I get. So like, if you happen to really want to hunt me down and ask me a question, you can do that, and I'm pretty good at getting back to people.
Yeah, I would agree. And the Bloods course, where can they find that?
Bro Research. It's the Advanced Blood Chemistry for Athletes course that I did with Ben House. Obviously, he's been a huge influence and a great colleague, and you should listen to everything he says, because he's usually right, and he'll tell you when he's wrong. So
which is a good thing to know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time today. Really appreciate it.
Likewise, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. As always, today, huge thanks for Dr. Tommy coming back on the podcast once again to discuss the nature of science and everything that goes into it. Again, I think this is an important topic for both people who are creating and putting things out into the world, and then also people who are consumers. So hopefully we gave you some things to look for and words of wisdom, I guess you could maybe say, on the topic. And if you're interested in more increasing your resilience, robustness, and potentially longevity, check out the Physiologic Flexibility Certification. This is the level 2. So level 1 is the Flex Diet Cert, which is primarily using the lens of metabolic flexibility. How can you get really good at using fats and carbohydrates? And we walk through 8 specific interventions of how to maximize that for body composition and performance. And they also increase your health at the same time. In the level 2, which is a Physiologic Flexibility Certification, it's taking that same idea of flexibility, but expanding it to you as an entire human. So what are some of the leverage points that we can do interventions on that allow you to recover faster, to be more robust, and potentially more resilient? My bias is that this will also increase your longevity. All right, so we know one of the leverage points is body temperature. Humans are homeotherms. They want to stay around 98.6. It's actually closer to 97.7. But we can do things like cold water immersion. We can do things like sauna, hot exposure, even exercising in the heat will also do it. And that expands your ability to be more adaptable. Again, we're not looking for body temperature to necessarily change very much. If it does change a lot, you're going to be in a world of hurt. But we can increase the resilience and the adaptive performance of your body in the area of temperature, and there's 3 other areas. So go to physiologicflexibility.com for all the information there. Thanks again to Dr. Tommy Wood. Check out all of his stuff, his blood course, and his Instagram. Always great stuff. Really appreciate him taking time away from his research to chat. And thanks again for listening. You can download this, share the podcast, leave us a review, whatever stars you think are appropriate, and any comments. It's all very much appreciated. Take care. Talk to you again soon.
I don't think this show is suitable for children.
I don't think this show is suitable for anybody.